Eat Man 98 is a 12-episode anime series following the gritty adventures of the world's greatest mercenary. Chaos and corruption has seeped into every part of this cyberpunk fantasy world, and he seeks to purge such nefarious villains by wielding his strange power. Now, I know the question burning at the back of literally everyone's mind. How good was Eat Man 98? Well, you're in luck today, because I will break down every episode and arc in Eat Man and give you my collected thoughts and opinions at the end of each. Time's a-wasting, let's get started with... We start off by scrolling through static background shots of the scenery to a really nice tune, soon following our main character as he saunters into a humble wooded village where he's immediately surrounded by angry villagers. For some reason, they assume him to be part of a group called Conzone, and they immediately go to axe gang him, only for him to show why he's called Eat Man. The altercation de-escalates and Eat Man reveals why he's here. Wait, his name isn't Eat Man? It's Bolt Crank? We get a little more background to the situation, namely about who Bolt is going up against. Conzone is an expansionist company bent on taking over the village's land. All of the mercenaries work for them, yes, all of them, and they have quite a lot of firepower, far more than the quaint village can handle. In his summons, Bolt is referenced as the greatest mercenary, to which the villagers immediately disagree and point to a man named Hard as the greatest. Hard. Bolt walks out and stares across a vast desert wasteland, fixating his gaze on the massive city resting on its horizon. This is where Conzone is, and this shot is a clever method of transitioning the setting to the city without major whiplash while, wait, he's here already? Holy shit, he just goes to work immediately. He brandishes the axe from earlier, showing that his true power is to conjure items he had previously eaten. That's cool and all, but whenever you boil it down, he's basically just like a bag of holding with an extra step. But that's not all. The guy is nimble and pretty dang strong. He dodges gunfire while beating fully geared soldiers with the blunt side of his axe before being subdued by Hard. Presumably he can dodge the gunfire of normal folks, but this Hard guy must be on another level of shooting, so he gives up. Instead of killing Bolt, the president decides to sway him to his side and join in the takeover of Mayville Village. He reveals a hilariously large cannon and an incredible sum of money, which Bolt wordlessly seems to accept as he begins to devour the cannon into himself, much to Hard's dismay. Hard seems to have been a fanboy of Bolt for quite some time, so seeing his idol bend down to some guns and money shattered the image in his head. After expounding his disappointment to Bolt, the morning of the attack arrives, and oh my god, they brought an entire fleet to this fight. They're literally just villagers with tiny axes. They don't even have axes anymore. What are they gonna do? Also, is there any government going on in this world? How is this even legal? The villagers take one final stand, but their hearts sink as Bolt aims the experimental cannon at the village. But wouldn't you know it, he turns the cannon to face Conzone. What an epic subversion of expectations, am I right? Unfortunately, it's short-lived, as Hard reveals he stole the energy pack for the gun, so Bolt can't actually fire the cannon. The situation is dire until Hard reveals he's a double agent and was actually the one who called Bolt here to begin with. Then, the two extremely powerful and badass dudes stand totally still in an open field and unload everything onto the fleet, destroying every mech, exploding every ship, killing every merc, and finally, putting an end to the corrupt CEO. And what would any action sequence be without a giant explosion at the end? The villagers are happy, the company is wiped off the face of the planet, the economy is likely decimated, and Mr. Crank coolly walks away from the village as a really terrible MIDI trumpet plays the opening theme. So, there was the first episode, and holy cow, what an introduction. Bolt Crank is not only an awesome name, but he's also just a beast of a human being. He's a perfect shot, has a weird, freaky power, and always chooses the right side when he can. However, he's also brazen and speaks seldomly, leading to cheap escalations of tension that the show never really addresses. Both him and Hard are characterized as being a major cut above the rest, boasting greater deadliness and intellect than those around them. At least in this episode, it resorts to showing every violent character other than them basically being impotent, which is a bit of a cop-out when it comes to writing such characters, at least for me. The world we're introduced to displays an extreme dichotomy. We start in a small village whose militia is armed with rakes and torches, and this is immediately contrasted by Konzeln's monumental cityscape looming on the horizon. This is a world of hyper-accelerated technology and prosperity, eclipsing poor neighboring villages who seem to have not progressed much beyond the Middle Ages. You'll find that Eatman 98 often pitches battles against some kind of ill-intended authority, and the climactic showdowns where justice prevails turn gritty and fatal. That's all well and good, but honestly, it really wasn't that good. In this episode, Eatman 98 effectively establishes its themes, characters, and setting without sacrificing much time. However, it steps on its own toes with an underdeveloped and shallow conflict, resulting in a conclusion that feels kinda undercooked. This episode isn't great by any means, but I also don't think it's particularly bad. I think there was a specific vision for this adaptation, and it was executed somewhat well, though it's plagued by narrative shortcuts, which, well, you'll see. The next episode starts by showing us a purple-haired anime girl in rags staring out a window surrounded by dead plants. The imagery here does a good job in wordlessly conveying that this is the episode's tragic heroine, and it being totally silent save for the ticking of the nearby clock was a tasteful choice in direction. As the scene fades to white, it energetically zooms out from the beating sun and replaces the silence with a driving theme. We see Mr. Crank trudging through the wasteland and happening upon a seaside town where we see a ship take off from its harbor. I really love this scene. The visuals and music really went a long way in dragging me into this scene and locking me in. Supposedly, Bolt needed to get onto that ship, and he needs to wait 1 hour for the next to arrive. A shady old man approaches Bolt and offers a job: protect a young lady in the nearby tower from a group of evil men trying to take her. Bolt agrees to 1 hour of help, and he goes to work. Immediately, the conflict begins, and there's absolute chaos outside where soldiers are attempting to storm the tower while the villagers desperately defend their fortifications. The girl is obviously despondent, and she's baffled Mr. Crank hasn't pried into her story a bit more, to which he flashes the money he was offered and says nothing. Okay, come on, we already established that he's an overall good force. What's going on with this ambiguous morality stuff? To make matters worse, the girl's friend Andy shows up to rescue her and finally says her name, which is Francois, by the way, but Bolt fires at him and causes him to fall from the tower. Francois understandably freaks the fuck out and yells at Bolt about how he couldn't possibly understand how she feels. He, of course, just continues to fire bullets into the carnage below, which, geez, some of these shots are pretty crazy. The assailing force is armed with rocket launchers and high-powered guns, while the defending force is just a bunch of villagers with farming tools again. The clock strikes 12 and the conflict below settles down just as the girl begins to scream in pain. Veins of light travel from her fingertips to her heart, and her I'm going to be honest here, I don't really know what they're trying to say with this shot. I'm guessing her chest is like tightening or something. It really just looks like it gets bigger. After regaining control of herself, she reveals that her blood acts as an elixir of youth, but only at 12 p.m. every day. So yeah, it makes sense that an all-out war for her custody would break out. And of course, the men who hired Bolt in the first place are not well-intentioned either. As they go to reap their reward for defending her, Bolt unleashes quite the monkey's paw moment. He agreed to protect the girl for an hour, and that hour hasn't ended yet. He brings out a massive gun and chases them off, destroying the entire wall of the tower in the process. Andy comes back and vows to protect Francois forever while staring down the barrel of Bolt's gun. Finally, the ship he needs to board lands back in the harbor, and his time is up. He once again walks off, but wait a second, this is just so strange. First, he flashes a cocky little grin, little bastard. Second, he's walking away from the tower directly toward the harbor, but aren't they at the top of the tower at the moment? Wait, what is going on here? I guess maybe he's going down the spiral staircase and it's just like extra long here, but this genuinely looks totally out of place. Whatever. Flagrant machismo and extensive goon blasting filler shots aside, the episode had a few elements that genuinely pulled me in. For one, these scenic introductions at the start of each episode so far are beautiful and evocative. The musical choice uplifts the entire experience, giving the whole scene this like hypnotic rhythm to attach to. There's also a striking mix of genre and tonality at play. Francois feels like a damsel in distress straight out of a fairy tale. A girl blessed with magical blood, locked away in a tall tower next to a harbor of a seaside town. The setup oozes the charm of a medieval fantasy, yet it's juxtaposed by the hard sci-fi elements like airships and guns. More importantly, this episode reinforces something crucial about Bolt. He always goes about things in his own way. He twists contracts to suit his moral boundaries, often undermining the wicked authorities that hired him for nefarious purposes. He solves every problem, but he refuses emotional transparency, this time with temporary consequences. Poor Francois never knows whether he's a hero or another threat. He flashes cash when she pleads for empathy. He nearly shoots her friend without explanation. We understand his intent, but she's left in the dark, damn it. It was all for the sake of having this badass walk-off that left everyone bewildered, and that's pretty fun to watch, but it undermines the realism of the situation and kind of sullies Bolt's character for me. Now, the realism I'm talking about here is specifically in reference to how humans talk to one another, as opposed to the setting. I don't care if that's realistic. Many things in this episode would have turned out alright if Mr. Crank here just communicated properly, but he doesn't do so specifically to amp up the drama and veil his intentions in mystery, only to pull that away in the final moment and reveal he's really just a good guy when all's said and done. It feels like a cheap trick made to elicit a particular emotion and arbitrarily creates tension, and you'll see that quite a lot throughout the series. This next one though, this one's a treat. Instead of the opening framing Bolt into the upcoming story, we're treated to an excellently paced and immediately interesting scene. The moody, rainy atmosphere of a claustrophobic concrete jungle coupled with a shadowy figure executing a man on his bed. The background chorus crescendos as the man's life comes to an end, choked in a cloud of feathers, as if an angel came down and delivered divine punishment onto this man. The scene ends, and we see Bolt walking down a dark alley. This episode is quite different from the previous two. We follow Aimie, a badass detective who is constantly dripped the heck out. Seriously, she just oozes cool in every frame. She's set to investigate the murders of a group of scientists, which inevitably leads her to instigate Bolt for some reason. I guess he's a renowned mercenary, so of course he's the murderer?
本当にヤッコさんがやったと思うかね。彼は冒険家だ。冒険家は殺しはしない。
Huh? Aimie corners Bolt at a bar, and the conversation quickly devolves into threats. The most important bit of information here, though, is that Bolt has some kind of history with Aimie. Moments like these are usually fascinating for me. Connecting characters to the world through established relationships is a great way to add intrigue into the story while fleshing out a character's place in the world. It can take a little finesse and creativity to have interactions like this come across as genuine, and while I don't think Eatman98 does a particularly good job here, it doesn't exactly flounder it in any spectacular fashion either. There are tons of anime out there that shy away from doing this, and in many cases it feels like the author just didn't want to bother with it. Thus, you get situations like the isekai format where it's practically expected to have narrative shortcuts like these, and that is decidedly not my jam. After threatening an officer of the law with a greatsword, Bolt is arrested and thrown in jail, though honestly I think he did it just to get a free bed. Later that night, Aimie arrives home and asks how her roommate Naomi is doing, but well, it does not look too good. Naomi seems to be undergoing a transformation of some kind, and she begs Aimie not to get close. After Naomi settles down, we see the specifics of their relationship get revealed pretty quickly, which I'm actually astounded by. Naomi mentions Bolt, which ties all of them together in some way, we just don't know how. The detective agency figures out the connections between the scientists. They're part of a top-secret research group of bioengineers. At the same time, another of the group is murdered in his home, and Aimie quickly arrives at the scene. However, someone else is there. Simultaneously, she's made aware that Bolt escaped jail and is at large, which would make the tension pretty high here if we didn't already know Bolt was a good guy. Aimie goes to corner the intruder and finds Naomi in a really strange getup. Naomi flees the scene with impressive acrobatics, leaping from building to building. She touches down on the roof of a nearby building and runs into Bolt, who just so happens to be there? That's not explained. Either way, Naomi leaps into his arms and embraces him, which Aimie arrives on cue to witness. And then, everything goes wrong. Naomi turns into a purple freakazoid while the cops hovering close, poised to to take down both Bolt and Naomi. The next episode immediately picks up with the chief phoning a lady who is wired up to the nines with crazy sci-fi hacker tools. He asks her to hack into the previous victim's desktop and see what she can find, and what she finds shocks her. Meanwhile, Naomi does her best to negotiate with the police, which, well, it involves strangling them and screaming that Bolt isn't a criminal, to which they understandably shoot her without thinking. The data files from earlier reveal the true nature of the murder victims. They all took part in a human bioengineering project where they were tasked with creating a superhuman. They used primarily orphaned children and folks without relatives, and 98% of them died horribly. The police take it upon themselves to capture Naomi alive, but the situation goes from bad to worse. When they begin to fire at her legs, I guess Bolt thought that was a bridge too far and goes to defend her. He unleashes a giant slab of concrete he ate to escape jail earlier, and this takes out the first police helicopter. But then a second one comes in and fatally wounds Naomi, killing the only person Amy had left. I'm gonna fast forward a little bit here as there's not too much left to talk about. Bolt is captured again, Naomi is dead, and it turns out Amy was the murderer the whole time, and she is pissed. There's one scientist left on the list, and she's going to finish her mission, no matter what. Bolt escapes prison yet again, this time with a pretty horrifying visual. Imagine going up against this guy. He then hitches a ride on a flying car, which, well, I guess it eventually leads to the crime scene, but how did he know that? As the final scientist flees the scene, Amy shoots the helicopter and it explodes, of course. After getting everything off her chest, Bolt appears looking like an absolutely ominous figure. Geez, the visuals in this episode are so dang cool. As Amy steals her resolve and pulls the trigger, Bolt runs her through with a great sword from earlier. We get two fantastic dramatic scenes of death here, and then there's another explosion for some reason which obscures Bolt and Amy fleeing the scene. The final scene has Bolt carrying Amy's body into the surrounding desert, but it turns out that Amy really can't die. She asks why Bolt was at the research facility 10 years ago. Apparently, he watched over the children there. She suddenly comes to realize the potential answer. What that is, though, is never confirmed. I like to think that Bolt was also an experiment, which implies the source of his abilities, but more interestingly suggests he had no living relatives, that before the experiment, he was a man who no one would miss. Bye Aimie leans hard into noir and cyberpunk aesthetics right from the get-go. We're in a crowded city, one where the buildings blot out the horizon, rain pours endlessly for some reason, and it's always nighttime. Its introduction is genuine cinema, a perfect example of how visual and sound complement each other, evoking a scene of divine punishment set within a claustrophobic urban abyss. It's a bold step forward, and we're shown it's not just a hammy show about a morally ambiguous but not really Mercenary. What unfolds here is a tragedy and also some of Ip Man's best writing. This arc introduces Amy with remarkable efficiency. Her authority, her history with Bolt, her emotional vulnerability and obsessive drive are all established while the mystery escalates around her. It becomes a tightly wound spiral of revenge, each kill pulling her further from justice and closer to self-destruction, as those around her are drawn into her conspiracy, all the way up until Naomi's death shatters the last piece of her world. Without anything left, Amy delivers on her cold promise, revenge against the final scientist who ruined their lives. And she succeeds. She avenges Naomi at the cost of everything. And the worst thing of all is that she has to go on living, now alone and with nowhere to go. This is Ip Man's strongest material. It's focused, thematic, and visually distinct. I've rewatched these two episodes so many times now, and each time I come back to it, I honestly can't believe this is in Ip Man of all things. That said, the same cracks are still there. First off, it seems the writers have a problem showing Mr. Crank the script ahead of time. Somehow, someway, Bolt knows exactly where to go, what to do, how to prepare, and most importantly, what the heck is going on. Writing a genuinely intelligent character is difficult, difficult, and so often we're given a lowered playing field. Bolt Crank is intelligent insofar as being capable of picking up on context clues, but the real detectives who have access to all the information they could ever possibly need are incompetent and quick to judge, yet slow to reach any meaningful conclusion. This undercuts immersion, but I will concede that it's in line with Ip Man's anti-authority messaging. For instance, an authority like the police are capable but slow and useless. Also, while not necessarily a downside, the random explosions are starting to get pretty funny, which typically you don't want during the dramatic conclusion of a killer's quest. But despite these flaws, I really enjoyed these 2 episodes. Honestly, if you watch any Ip Man at all, watch these 2 episodes right here and call it a day. Before continuing to the next arc, if you've watched this far, obviously you have some form of opinion on this video. I'm still trying to figure out how to make these things more entertaining, so any input at all, such as liking or commenting, really goes a long way in signaling to me that what I'm doing is at least okay. And if it is something you like, maybe consider subscribing, as I'm going to be making more content of this type. Of course, you don't have to, but it would make me pretty happy. While we're at it, what type of content do you want to see? I've received a few anime suggestions, but I want to hear from all of you out there in the comments below. What anime do you want to get this type of treatment? Anyways, let's get on to Mega Mix. The opening here is decidedly less sprawling and energetic, but is rich with atmosphere nonetheless. We open with a lamp hanging from the ceiling as the small, closed room slowly comes into view. Immediately, we jump into the situation. A girl is held hostage by some heavily kitted mercenary, and his goal is to bring her back to her father. As with most of the other intros, the music really pulls a lot of weight here. We're blessed with a synth-heavy track I wouldn't find out of place in something like Lunacid, and I really wish I could sample it for you without getting purged, so you'll just have to deal with whatever music I have going right now. Bolt easily subdues this man and phones Dijkstra Corporation's president. As the call goes through, we get a view of the town, another expansive cityscape, this time under an all-encompassing web of wires. Bolt informs the president that he'll return Myra safely. The president immediately showcases some red flags, what with being in a tube and completely encased in a metal suit of some kind. To make matters worse, his secretary Marco offers to retrieve Myra himself, for some reason. The president agrees and they both laugh maniacally, and gosh darn it, I guess they're evil. Myra isn't quite a willing captive for Bolt, and she tears her clothes off and screams for people to help her. Bolt lets himself get beaten up and Myra makes her escape, only to be cornered by a crab robot that she refers to as Gareth. Marco swoops in alongside the crab, but he's interrupted by Bolt, who calls out to him. It's apparent that they've met each other in the past, but only Bolt seems to remember. Regardless, Bolt easily rips off the crab arm and makes a run for it, Myra in tow once again. This is about the halfway point of the episode, and it kind of starts to drag on unnecessarily from here, so I'll just go over the broad strokes. Myra has a flashback to when she ran away previously. The most interesting part is that Bolt was there. What an odd thing for her to forget. Both Bolt and Myra get attacked by another Gareth, and they flee to the roof. Meanwhile, Marco makes it back to Dijkstra Core and seems to be suffering from some headaches. As he tries to recall who Bolt was, he starts to remember that he was also involved in rescuing Myra before. The president ominously answers Marco by lamenting his memory returning, and that's where the episode cuts off. The second episode spins its wheels by recapping Marco's confrontation from the previous episode, and then the president goes full-on evil by subduing him and erasing his memories once again. Then we get the flashback we saw last episode again, but it's almost the whole thing. About 1/3 through the total runtime of its second episode, we finally start to move the plot forward. Myra wakes up in the morning and finds Bolt resting on the ground outside of her hiding place. Somehow, Myra lugs Bolt, a man literally 3 times her size, all the way to their room and starts to cook breakfast. And you better believe she's frying up some good old-fashioned scrambled screws. There's an awkward conversation where Myra starts talking about regaining the memories of her lover, implying very strongly that Bolt is the one she's talking about. Bolt shoots her down instantly and gets back to the task at hand. I guess Bolt rents a car and makes his way over to the corporation where Marco greets him. Marco shares a very strange piece of trivia here, stating that he's Dijkstra's only employee aside from the president. Even stranger, as they descend the elevator elevator, they see floor after floor of various mech hangars. As they're all shown to the president's massive, empty room, he descends ominously from above. They do pretty well dehumanizing this character up to this point by only showing this mechanical shell here. He's practically like a mechanical serpent or spider. Anyways, Marco shoots the tube, revealing that he didn't actually lose his memories this time. He then rushes over to Myra and starts screaming at her to remember, which works about as well as you would expect. Surprise! Shooting the tube wasn't enough and the president isn't dead. A fight ensues and Bolt gets restrained immediately. Myra and Marco lose their footing off the raising platforms, and then they get shot in the head. Wait, what? The president emerges from his device and confirms Myra and Marco were both robots the whole time. He taunts Bolt, who suddenly summons an amalgamate of Gareth parts and easily breaks through his restraints. I like this part a lot because it explains where that Gareth from the last episode went. Bolt just devoured it. It also highlights a recurring theme in Eat Man. The villain's weapon is often turned against them and deals a fatal blow. You reap what you sow and all. It also shows that Bolt just loves the irony of doing such a thing. He's there for the drama all the way. Turns out the president was also a robot, and the person who hired Bolt to kill him was the president himself. Whoa! Bolt then repairs Myra and Marco's memory chips and restores them to life off-screen. He later runs into them in the park where Myra asks if they've met before. He smirks, pushes up his sunglasses, and simply says, "Nope," before walking away. Oh, Bolt, you cheeseball. Megamix's strongest card is in its delivery of the atmosphere. Dijkstra's looming silhouette, cavernous mech hangars, and the baffling revelation that Marco is the president's only employee create a strong foundation of unease. The ending builds towards a tragic but expected reveal, unveiling Marco and Myra as robots, and then it just keeps going. The president is a machine, Myra and Marco are his creations, and finally, the president hired Bolt to kill himself. It's absolutely baffling. On rewatch, the ending came flooding back to me instantly. It's almost as memorable as Bye Aimie, but the journey there is far less compelling. Megamix is a slow burn, but not in the good way. Many shows stated to fit into such a description often have wonderful atmosphere and subtle tensions building up throughout the show, eventually coaxing the viewer to the edge of their seats without them knowing. Some of my favorite shows are like this. Shingu, Dead Dead Demons, even School Rumble or Urusei Yatsura, all anime this channel has previously covered in one way or another. The major difference in these shows is that they don't retread old ground. The pacing struggles under the astronomical weight of repetition. Instead of layering tension through meaningful development, the episodes recycle the same flashback over and over again, and we're stalled with extended action sequences that don't significantly push the needle forward. The narrative clearly has a destination in mind, but it fails to make the journey intriguing. Myra and Marco suffer the most from this. Myra's motivations are thin beyond wanting escape and affection. Marco's arc hinges on withheld information and last-minute revelations, and neither of them have any organic character growth. They're positioned as tragic figures, but they never quite feel believable. And, of course, we have to talk about Bolt for a second. It's clear now, this dude is all about the drama. He allows Myra to flee, he stages dramatic standoffs, he lets himself be restrained, and gets the girl killed. And at the end of it all, he coolly denies knowing her while sporting a cocksure grin. This dude lives for it. Megamix feels like an arc with a strong ending but a hazy middle. It sports awesome themes like artificial identity, manufactured authority, self-destruction, but that's all entirely in its final moments. There's no lead-in or build-up to any of it. Coming off of Bye Aimie, Megamix is a disappointing venture that fails to reach the highs of its predecessor. But it can't get much worse than that, right? Oh boy, Ambrosian Days. This arc is a whopping 4 episodes, so I'm going to go quick with a recap here. Though, you may see that most of this arc is a bit, long-winded. We start with some nice shots of Ambrosia, the central setting of this 4-part epic. There's a strange otherworldly feel to this place. It also immediately feels lower tech than some of the cities we've been to already, though I can't really articulate why. Maybe it's just the stone buildings. A couple goes through a totally normal conversation about a sword choosing the next king of Ambrosia. Offhandedly, they also mention how the king hasn't been himself ever since his daughter was abducted by a demon. Surely there aren't actual demons in this setting though, right? Nope. There are demons in this cyber fantasy anime. Well, I guess Shin Megami Tensei can get away with it. We're introduced to the obviously evil leader of the neighboring county of Weizan, Dumar. He brings the king a strange medicine, which the king is sadly dependent on by this point. Bolt is once again just wandering around, this time with less reason for doing so. It's never really revealed why he was headed to Ambrosia in the first place, and he sort of just gets swept up into this whole ordeal for little benefit to himself. He gets picked up by the arms dealer from the couple mentioned earlier, and they both make their way into town, where we're introduced to Vanessa. She's a wild child that's alarmingly brash yet capable when combating small demons. Her and the group of children who follow her around are impoverished and seemingly desperate for food, enough to potentially throw their lives away battling the newly arisen scorpion demon. Both her and Bolt enlist in the volunteer army to combat this thing, though we already know it's likely a distraction set by Dumar. Speaking of, somebody who is definitely not Dumar infiltrates the trophy room with a sacred sword and takes out the guards with some crazy red magic. Okay, so now we're dealing with magic and demons. Earlier, Francois had what may be considered magical blood, but with the events of Bye Aimie having taken place, it was equally likely that she was given the ability through experimentation. Now we just have straight up magic red lightning bolts. In episode 2, we get some simple exposition where Dumar monologues about the sword. Then Ted, Vanessa's surrogate father, chases after Vanessa, but somehow winds up infiltrating the upper floors of the castle without getting caught. This is a totally meaningless scene, by the way. Meanwhile, Vanessa and her entourage go to the battlefield. The demon scorpion arrives and, okay, yeah, I think they're gonna need better weapons to take that thing down. Throughout the episode, Bolt was shopping around for various gunpowders and ammunition, all of which he consumed. Bolt arrives on the scene and instantly vaporizes the demon scorpion, and meanwhile, Dumar realizes the sword is useless in his hands and is better off melted down, which is smart. He hands it to his follower to dispose of properly. Episode 3 starts with Bolt receiving honors for saving the town, and then it's back to business as usual. Vanessa goes to help clear rubble from the battlefield, the king goes psychotic from withdrawal, Dumar continues to bum around and do nothing, and then suddenly the side character I haven't mentioned yet becomes extremely relevant. Coco is the bartender and proprietor of a somewhat classy bar in town. There have been a few short scenes hinting at her being the subject of blackmail. To what end? Well, we never know, but it's important because she winds up getting a hold of the royal sword. Coco buys it to defend herself after being told a gun doesn't suit her, but it's really to no avail. Even when she stands up to the random jerkwad who was blackmailing her, she's subdued really easily, and Bolt comes up and does his thing. Then, when the bad guy goes to run Bolt down with his armored vehicle, Bolt conjures the sword, which then grows massive, and he just goes with the flow. I guess this means that Bolt is the chosen one, huh? The 4th episode starts with... Okay, I have to talk about this one real quick. The show has a crazy disparity of musical quality. Namely, this one that plays several times throughout Ambrosian Days is just a horribly out-of-place MIDI trumpet fanfare that sends me into a psychotic rage every time I hear it. If you watch Eat Man, you'll soon know my pain. Bolt returns the sword to its rightful place, and all is right in the kingdom once again. Oh, wait, Dumar is still doing stuff. The first half of this episode is a quiet escalation for what's to come, and it's done relatively well. Dumar finally puts his plan into action, but it was discovered by a guard captain before the final steps could continue. He attempts to quietly thwart Dumar's actions, but the king has already lost his mind and begs for Dumar's medicine. The king rewards Dumar with access to the royal scriptures, the royal sword, and the royal valley. Dumar is shaken slightly when he views the sword, but he plays it off well. For some reason, the people who are most skeptical of him decide to leave him alone in the royal sword room. Outside, they meet with Vanessa randomly and decide to take her with them to the Royal Valley for some reason. Ted happens upon the town square where everyone is freaking out about someone dying and several people being held hostage. Surely they're talking about the whole Dumar thing, but how do they know? It literally just happened, and there wasn't really any escalation for it. I don't know, this whole scene is just so confusing. Over in the Royal Valley, Dumar reveals his plot to take over the Empire and his goofy new demon form. The guard captain valiantly dies to protect his son. Oh, yeah, sorry, I didn't go over that because it didn't matter. Vanessa stands up to Dumar and brandishes the royal sword, which grows massive. So wait, she's the one? Not Bolt? Why did that happen earlier? Anyways, the sword doesn't do anything. Bolt shows up and chucks the entire demon scorpion at Dumar, who is eaten by it very quickly, and then, of course, it explodes. With all that out of the way, Vanessa becomes the Ambrosian princess, but who cares? That's it. That's Ambrosian Days. You probably already know what I'm gonna say about Ambrosian Days. It's pretty bad. But what exactly is bad about it? It fails primarily in its execution. There's too many characters, too many plot threads, and almost no follow-through. Vanessa is the only bright spot here. She's spunky, protective, and clearly anchored by her found family. She has the foundation of a great protagonist, but the problem is that she's the only one. Everyone else is just like a wet paper bag. Coco's subplot is the clearest example here. The legendary royal sword, supposedly central to the arc's mythology, passes through multiple hands, lands with her, briefly sparks conflict, and then ultimately contributes almost nothing to the climax. For some unexplained reason, it reacts to Bolt and does not elaborate on this. It injures Dumar once, but then Bolt throws the demon scorpion at him anyways, rendering the sword totally meaningless. The sword is framed as something integral to this kingdom, but its biggest moments are during a dead-end side plot and the final battle, where it doesn't do anything. And unfortunately, that's an established pattern that repeats across the arc. The king unwittingly enables the villain, though we never get his lucid thoughts on the matter. Does he just die off screen? Is he just forever? We never understand what was so bad about Coco's blackmail. Also, the sword passing to her was so convoluted and entirely meaningless. Her entire story's purpose falls flat and fails to bring anything interesting to the table because the central item to her conflict winds up being almost nothing. Vanessa's dad infiltrates the castle, but this amounts to nothing other than wasting our time. Dumar's transformation into a demon arrives without any meaningful buildup. And we finish the major bad guy with something entirely out of left field, though I do suppose it's on brand at this point to defeat the villain with their own weapon. For an arc given twice the runtime of any other arc, Ambrosian Days leaves more unresolved threads than any other story in the show. What makes it so much worse is how that time is spent elsewhere. There are extended scenes devoted to side characters who matter little to the plot. Boring and sometimes tasteless scenes dominate the runtime and distract the viewer from anything meaningful. Setting details are emphasized while the central narrative just kinda waits there. Normally I appreciate world-building detours, but this feels like they just had no clue what to do, ever, with the story. The first episode promises something grand, and the structure is there. The characters are introduced cleanly, the villain is interesting, and it makes you wonder what he'll do next, and then it's just nothing. It just explodes in episode 2. I apologize if my analysis here is lacking or overly whiny. I just found Ambrosian Days to be god-awfully boring, and it's disappointing that 1/3 of this series is dedicated to it. I'm going to take a breather before the final arc and talk about the show's opening and ending sequences. I think these sequences are pretty important to the overall lasting image an anime has. It may be a stupid opinion, but I honestly think a great opening can push a mediocre anime into being a good one. Over time, my memories and understanding of an anime's plot will fade, but I'll always remember a good opening. They're also short enough and are usually accessible enough to pick up and watch on a whim. Much less of a time commitment than watching a whole episode. Ip Man 98's opening Burning Blue by the band Magic exists in a pretty okay spot for me. While the visuals aren't anything to write home about, it's a fun, energetic, and manly rockabilly song that really settles me into a particular mood. By virtue of the song being well-themed, I'm willing to forgive Ip Man for being overall a little mediocre, as I'm already put into a particular mood when listening to this. Visually, we have Bolt walking slowly toward the screen, growing larger little by little until the final 2 beats of the song. In the background, we see the different protagonists of each arc in some form, and I'm pretty sure these are unique scenes that aren't in any episodes. Though it can be a little difficult to tell who is who, as some of them are either obscured by the dark film grain or look entirely different. Like, it's impossible to tell this is Francois, aside from knowing this happens to her in the episode. Or this data chip with Marco and Myra. Marco is distinct and clear to read, but Myra looks pretty different, at least to me. Compared to openings, endings are relatively less important. People usually skip to the next episode or tune out pretty quickly once it comes on, and if they're on Netflix, it just skips immediately without input. Perception around endings might be changing a little bit nowadays, as there have been pretty significant steps up in production from studios like MAPPA, where Chainsaw Man's endings were all different, highly experimental, and featured different artists. They're definitely an outlier though. I feel like they're usually for slower, more emotional pieces for winding down, and this ending fits that vibe perfectly. The ending song is Tabibito, or Wanderer, once again by the band Magic. Again, we have rather lackluster visuals paired with amazing music. We get this down-tempo waltz dripping with emotion, carried heavily by the lead singer's performance. The meaning behind its lyrics reflect Bolt's movements through each of these arcs, freely passing by, refusing connection, but leaving folks with a smile. One neat thing about the visuals is that Bolt is walking away from the screen this time. It's not exactly amazing or anything, but it's fun to have him walk up to us in the opening and then pass us by and continue on his own in the ending. Really gives a sense that he's just passing through. Despite the visuals lacking, I feel like they did well enough that I don't really mind. Sometimes simplicity is okay, and I'd prefer something like this as opposed to something far more elaborate, but potentially a mess. I gotta say, looking into the bands that play these openings and endings is almost always a treat. Magic's run was pretty short-lived, all things considered, but I really love the vocalist's performance, and their bassist was really excellent. Rockabilly isn't my favorite genre, but I couldn't help but listen to their best hits on YouTube over and over while making this video. They're really great, and I give them a hearty recommendation. Also, they have an album titled Fooly Cooly, and this title was the inspiration for the far more cult classic anime of the same name. Neat little trivia for you. Well, that's really all I have to say about the music. I really liked diving into the opening and ending here, so I think I'm gonna continue doing that with other series, whether you all like it or not. We're wrapping up the final arc here, and I really just gotta pester you one more time. If you like this content, please let me know in some way, such as leaving a like or something. Subscribing also goes a long way in lifting the channel up considerably, and I'd love to reach a wider audience someday. Anyways, here's the final arc of Eat Man 98. Unlike literally every single arc before it, we aren't treated to a quiet introduction sequence. Instead, we get a prolonged shot of a nighttime cityscape, and then we immediately get into the action. Elections are coming up in whatever town this is. We have Senator Sharif versus President Grant. There are so many stills in this sequence, really not a good start. Suddenly, there's an attempt on Sharif's life, but Hard manages to protect him just in time. Yeah. Hard, remember? Meanwhile, Bolt has been hired by Grant's assistant Denzel to protect Grant from any acts of terrorism. Bolt immediately sniffs out a bomb and takes care of it, mostly. There's discussion from both sides about the mercenary Raffen. Somehow, someway, everyone just knows it's Raffen. Oh yeah, definitely Raffen. This is so Raffen. Literally every single character in this show knows who she is. But we have no clue, so why should we care? Sharif comes across as overburdened and stressed, but also firm in his stance to become president. He solemnly states that he has to do it for the future of the country, but he never says what he's going to do. In fact, he tells Hard that he would never understand, so we never get any kind of resolution to that. This is classic Eat Man storytelling though. Anything that requires a modicum of thought and research is hand-waved into oblivion. Speaking of, Bolt speaks cryptically about how the assassination attempts were botched, and he just refuses to answer. Suddenly, and I do really mean suddenly, Sharif is shot at a rally, presumably by Raffen. There's literally no build-up. One moment we're tagging Bolt in a back alley, and then we get screaming and slideshows of people panicking. It's a little jarring, but I won't lie, it's simple enough to follow. Hard gives chase to Raffen, managing to corner her in some nondescript building of sorts, maybe a museum? They get into a shootout in the dark, and Bolt just kind of walks up to him and starts helping. Unfortunately, Raffen escapes. Sharif was hospitalized but seems stable. Hard is really taking his screw-up hard and vows to make this situation right. Sharif's secretary mentions that they know who contracted Raffen. It was Denzel, Grant's secretary. As Hard goes through some angst alongside the reporter from earlier, they're both picked up by Denzel for absolutely no reason. You know, after watching this scene over and over again to try figuring it out, I think I realized that the reporter called Denzel herself. Maybe I'm just an idiot, but the implication of that call wasn't strong enough for me to follow coherently. Also, how am I supposed to assume she just has his number anyways? Hard starts pressing Hard about the assassin situation, only to have Raffen just bust through the door, guns a-blazing. There's a confusing and half-hearted shootout where Raffen yells at Denzel to forget about their contract. For some reason, Hard just sees this as undeniable proof Denzel colluded with Raffen, so he just shoots Denzel. Maybe a little bit hasty there, buddy. Raffen outguns Hard and kicks him out of the window to finish the job stop for some reason. Bolt is there just in time to intercept the situation, but Raffen escapes into the dark after receiving contact from her earpiece. She's still receiving commands in spite of Denzel being dead, so, oh gosh, Denzel wasn't actually part of it at all. Well, isn't that just unfortunate and totally unpreventable? Next episode starts with Denzel's funeral, and Hard is hospitalized. His mercenary instincts tell him to prepare for a nighttime ambush, and he's right. Raffen bursts through the window and goes to shoot at the bed, but Hard was one step ahead and strikes from the shadows. His bullets have no effect on her battle armor. Sharif's men come in to back up Hard and yell her name in disbelief. After she gets blasted out of the window, Hard asks the secretary why he knows of Raffen. I don't know, Hard. Maybe they know her because they literally talked about her last episode? His answer leaves Hard even more suspicious of the situation, and it's supposed to send major red flags to the viewer. There isn't nearly enough time to stew on it though, as it's immediately revealed that Sharif was the puppet master the entire time. He staged his own assassination attempt and colluded with oligarchs and government officials alike in order to gain the upper hand in the election. Wow, that's so crazy. The reporter gets a message from Raffen and is, to no surprise, taken hostage by her at their meeting place. Raffen did this explicitly to get to Hard, but we don't really know why she needs Hard in the first place. It's just a dramatic set piece for the sake of being one. Sadly, the reporter's cameraman dies somewhat dramatically, though we never really see him get shot or anything. He just kind of dies. Man, I can't get over how much of this arc is such an afterthought. There's a big warehouse shootout between Hard and Raffen, and it's actually pretty cool in certain moments. Raffen decides to put a knife to the reporter's neck to stop Hard. Bolt throws another gun at Hard, and for some reason this convinces Raffen to let go of the reporter and start a really stupid shootout. You know the deal, the bad guy can't aim at all against someone standing still, but the good guy has perfect aim on a moving target. Yeah, it's total nonsense. The reporter reveals that Sharif was behind everything just as his henchmen launch missiles at the warehouse to bury everything. Obviously they survive and they move forward to stop Sharif. He finally makes his first public appearance since the attempt on his life, but the primary is cut short as Hard effortlessly makes it on stage and threatens his life once more. Somehow, Bolt gets on stage as well and winds up getting the final shot. Fast forward, and Hard is laying flowers and a gun at a grave. He passes Bolt a coin in exchange for the flowers from episode 1, and we have finally come full circle. The reporter begs Hard to stop being a mercenary, to which he replies, "I can't stop." Man, what a hard line. For better or worse, this is the most Eat Man arc in all of Eat Man. We have Bolt in a hired gun scenario, a bleak setting, nonsensical action sequences, and just about as much political corruption as there are foregone conclusions. The story itself plays out like a distilled version of the series' usual formula. Bolt takes on another mercenary job in a world where every authority figure is compromised, and timely reveals of snakish ne'er-do-wellisms ignite into a chain of confusing betrayals and chaotic firefights. Political intrigue is hinted at from multiple angles, but as with many Eat Man stories, the details are intentionally left hazy, so the writers didn't have to think too hard about it. Plot progression is frenetic as baffling decisions are made with little to no deliberation. Characters are callously tossed aside for no real reason other than to drum up the drama, while others are central to the plot but receive no background info to tie them into the conflict. A lot of this arc is rushed in such obvious ways. Characters show up randomly, important sequences start with no build-up, and the way the truth is revealed is anticlimactic and outright nonsensical in some places. Sharif's main guy feigns ignorance to knowing Raffen after Hard asks why they know of her. Well, they literally were talking about her not too long ago. How is this surprising? At the end of the show, Hard is given a small character moment where he reflects on why he continues living as a mercenary. In theory, it's meant to be the show's final thought-provoking statement. As we see throughout the series, living as a mercenary poses a thrill like no other. To live outside the shadow of corrupt officials, but also to enact one's own justice by thwarting those very same individuals. But it just kinda happens. Hard literally just says that he can't stop, and that's it. It feels like the writers wanted to be poignant here, but it's too concise and too wordless that it fails to capture any meaning at all. To me, it comes across as the writers thinking, I'll write this because it feels like it should be there, but they lack the chops to truly deliver on it, and if that isn't the most Eat Man thing I've ever heard, then I don't know what is. One common thread Eat Man consistently returns to is corruption. Nearly every arc revolves around compromised institutions, politicians abusing power, corporations exploiting people, or abusers masquerading as victims. The world is fundamentally broken at every turn. Bolt drifts through this world as a mercenary, though his actions are more akin to like a corrective force. The haughty officials see a famous and powerful gun for hire and always think they can manipulate him just like anyone else, but this is never the case, as Bolt operates based on his own unspoken code of morals and always dismantles the true source of corruption. He devours the evildoers' machines and weapons, taking the corruption into himself, and inevitably wields them against their owners. Eat Man 98 is filled to the brim with compelling concepts like this, but the writing rarely has the discipline to fully explore them. Each arc has high-impact moments that should feel powerful, but they're often unearned or disappear too quickly. To make matters worse, the connective tissue linking the beginning and end often feels like a mixed bag between aimless and pointless. None of the villains presented have any nuance beyond their evil intentions, save for Aimie, which is yet another reason it remains untouched at the very top of this show. But underneath its layered missteps, there's an undeniable charm to the series. It brandishes 90s attitude and rule of cool almost as brazenly as its clear anti-authority messaging. Combined with the knockout arc of Bye Aimie, Eat Man 98 has enough going for it to compel me to give it a very light recommendation. If you enjoy the gritty 90s visuals combined with its sci-fi fantasy themings, then give this one a shot. If anything, just watch Bye Aimie. And that's just about everything I have to say about Eat Man 98. There's another Eat Man anime out there, but it's decidedly much different from this series, and surprisingly, not in a very good way. I might cover that later on this channel, but I don't want to make any promises. This video was largely an experiment to see if I could write a bit more freely about a show, as opposed to trying to condense the experience down as small as possible. I really enjoy doing this, and I'm interested in tackling some more shows in this fashion, like maybe going back to my roots and tackling School Rumble again. There are a few other ideas I have, and I'm going to focus on those for now, though. If you reach the end of this video, that's really something. Honestly, thank you. It means a lot to have someone invested enough to hear me ramble about this nonsense. I plan on doing more stuff like this, and hopefully I'll have something for you guys shortly. I can't promise I can tackle huge series, but I can chip away at them bit by bit, if that's what the people want. Before you ask, no, I'm not going to cover One Piece. That's way too big. I hope to start with shorter stuff like Eat Man, but honestly, even I don't know what I'm going to do after this. Anyways, I've rambled for way too long. Thanks again, and I hope you have a great one.